Hello everyone. Today, you are born into silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but one filled with expectation. A silence that listens more than it speaks. One that weighs on your first breath, like the fold of a silk kimono, too tightly wrapped. Outside it's early spring. The plum trees are shyly beginning to bloom, their scent faint but determined, like a secret ready to unfold. You don't know this yet, your eyes are closed, but the world you've entered is one that remembers. Remembers battles fought before your father was born, remembers names carved not in stone, but in skin, in duty, in stories whispered beside old fires. You are samurai, or rather, you are born into the possibility of becoming one. There's a difference, and that difference you will learn is everything. Your mother holds you briefly. Her hands are soft, but not weak. She has held swords before, not as a warrior, but in ritual, in memory, in ceremony. Her silence is not passive. It is the silence of mountains, of snow falling onto pine. She doesn't weep, she bows. And you are taken from her arms not with cruelty, but with precision. Because in this world, tenderness and control are not enemies. The midwife does not speak your name aloud. Names here are precious and private, like blades passed down generations, wrapped in cloth, revealed only when needed. You are simply the child for now, and that is enough. You grow before you understand what growth is. The first years are blurred, remembered only in fragments. The smell of ink, the warmth of tatami mats, the sharp sting of winter air creeping through the rice paper screens. You are taught before you know you are learning. Lessons do not arrive in classrooms. They are folded into daily life, the way to sit, to speak, to listen without interrupting, to bow with your eyes lowered, but your mind sharp. Your grandfather visits once when you are still small enough to crawl. He says nothing, but sits beside you for hours. Later, you learn that he was once feared on horseback, that his name brought trembling to distant villages. But in that moment, he only places his hand gently on your shoulder. That, in this world, is affection. You're not praised. Not in the way others might expect. No applause, no trophies, no well done. But when you manage to balance the practice sword across your palms without dropping it, your father nods once. That nod is a gift. You carry it for weeks, like a warm ember under your robe. There are sounds you learn to recognize early. The soft thud of your father's steps down the corridor, never hurried. The click of the tea bowl against the wood. The distant rustle of bamboo leaves when the wind comes from the west. Each of these, in their own way, become part of your education. Because being samurai is not just about fighting, it is about noticing. About becoming a vessel for the world without leaking yourself all over it. You do not dream of glory. Not yet. Your dreams are strange, shaped by incense and moonlight. Sometimes you see your own hands covered in blood, but you do not know whose. Sometimes you stand in an empty field with nothing but a flute, and the sound it makes is more painful than a scream. These dreams stay with you. No one explains them. In time, you stop asking. You learn of your ancestors not through stories of victory, but of sacrifice. The one who rode into a hopeless battle because his lord refused to retreat. The one who waited 5 days in silence to deliver a message that changed a siege. The one who, having failed, took his own life with such grace that even the enemy wept. These are your role models, and they are terrifying. Honor is not explained to you. It is modeled. Worn like a second skin by your elders, never named aloud, but always there. When your uncle is accused of disrespecting a visiting daimyo, he disappears from the household. No one tells you where he went, but a week later, you see your father kneel in the garden for hours, eyes closed. That's when you understand. Honor is not about what others see. It's about the weight you carry when no one is watching. There's a game you like to play in the courtyard, tracing shapes in the gravel with a stick. One day, your mother stops you mid-drawing. "Only monks and spirits walk that path," she says softly, brushing away your lines with a branch. You don't understand, but you stop anyway. Not because of fear, but because of reverence. Reverence, you are learning, is stronger than fear. It lasts longer. And then, the first real lesson. Pain. You're 5 when it happens. A simple fall. Nothing dramatic. You trip during morning practice. Your hand lands on a hidden stone, and the pain shoots up your arm like fire. You cry out, instinctively. But before the sound leaves your mouth, you bite down on it. Hard. Your instructor doesn't rush to you. He watches. Only when you sit up, holding your hand but not weeping, does he nod. "Now you begin," he says. You do not know what he means, but something shifts inside you. A boundary crossed. You've met pain, and you've bowed to it. That, too, is part of being samurai. The seasons pass. With each one, your duties increase. You're taught the art of stillness, how to sit for hours without twitching, how to watch the flame of a candle without blinking, how to write your name over and over until it feels like water flowing through your brush. You begin to understand the dual nature of your world, beauty and death, side by side. You see your father polish his blade with the same care your mother arranges wildflowers. You hear poems read aloud in the same room where strategies for battle are whispered. There is no contradiction, only balance. One evening, your father allows you to touch his katana. Not wield it, not yet, but to hold it, still in its scabbard. It is heavier than you expected, not just in weight, but in meaning. You feel it like a heartbeat in your hands, and something inside you, something ancient perhaps, stirs. "You will carry this one day," he says. And for the first time, you want to, but not because of glory, not because of power, because in that moment, you understand. The blade is not a tool of death. It is a keeper of discipline, a mirror of your own restraint, a line drawn in silence between chaos and harmony. You're 7 when your first duel is arranged, with wooden swords, of course, but serious nonetheless. You train for days, your arms aching, your mind racing. When the moment comes, you bow, you breathe, and you lose. Not badly, not shamefully, but clearly. And yet, the shame burns. Not because others laugh, they don't. Not because your father scolds you, he doesn't. But because you know you could have done better. That is the first lesson of defeat. Its sharpest edge comes from within. That night, your mother finds you outside, staring at the moon. "You lost well," she says, offering you tea. You drink in silence. "Next time," she adds, "lose even better. That's how you learn to win." You don't fully understand, but her voice stays with you, like the echo of a temple bell long after it stops ringing. As your 8th birthday approaches, you begin to see yourself as part of something larger, not just a family or a class, but a river of tradition flowing from past to future. You are not the first drop, nor the last, but you are responsible for keeping it pure. On the morning of your birthday, you wake to the sound of the shakuhachi flute. Your father stands in the garden, playing for no one. The melody is slow, almost mournful. You listen, your chest tight with something you don't have a name for yet. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's longing, maybe it's the early stirrings of honor, like a seed just beginning to push through soil. That day, you are given your first real kimono, not ceremonial, not playful, but serious. Indigo blue, with the faint crest of your house embroidered near the heart. You wear it with care, aware that from this moment forward, your footsteps will echo a little louder, your shadow will carry more weight. No one claps, no one feasts. But when you bow to your father and he bows back, deeply, fully, you feel seen, truly seen. And in that moment, under the grey sky, with the smell of pine and ink in the air, you understand the quiet truth that will shape your life. To be samurai is to belong more to others than to yourself, and to do so with grace, like a candle that burns not to be admired, but simply to give light. You rise without being told, not because you want to, but because that is what is done. And in the life you are stepping into, what is done carries more meaning than what is felt. The floor is cold beneath your feet, not painfully so, just enough to remind you that comfort is not guaranteed. You begin the day with ablutions, washing your face with water that bites. It stings your skin, tightens your breath. But you are told the cold is a teacher. It teaches presence and discipline. Then comes the first task of the morning, bowing to your elders, to the household shrine, to the portrait of your ancestor who died in service of a daimyo centuries ago. You don't know his story fully yet, only that he stood until the very end, and that is why his image still watches over you. Your formal lessons begin with calligraphy. The brush is heavier than it looks, and the ink behaves like a wild animal. It runs too fast or too slow, pools in places it shouldn't. Each stroke must be confident, deliberate. There is no erasing in this world, only starting over. You learn this quickly, as your first scrolls are quietly taken away and replaced. No scolding, no correction, just again. The characters you write are not random. They are chosen with purpose. Words like honor, patience, stillness. You do not yet grasp their full meanings, but the act of shaping them over and over begins to etch them into your body as much as your mind. Sometimes your instructor, a man with a voice like worn wood, speaks to you while you write. There is a way to hold the brush, he says, that reveals whether your heart is trembling. You look down at your hands. They do tremble a little, but each day less so. In the afternoons, the lessons shift. You move from the writing room to the dojo, a space that smells of sweat, sandalwood, and time. Here, the sword is not romanticized. It is a responsibility, one that begins not with slashing or shouting, but with stance, balance, breath. Your bokken, the wooden practice sword, is nearly as tall as you. At first, it feels like a stranger in your grip, clumsy and heavy. But with each repetition, it becomes more familiar. Not an extension of your body yet, but at least no longer a foreign object. You are not alone in your training. There are other children, other young boys and girls in similar robes, each trying to shape themselves into something acceptable. Some are louder, some cry, some pretend to be brave. You learn quickly not to compare. Because comparison invites pride or shame, both of which are distractions. The instructor here is not gentle, but he is not cruel either. When you stumble, he watches. When you fall, he waits. When you succeed, he says nothing. His silence is a kind of feedback, and eventually, you begin to crave it more than praise. There are days your body aches, your palms blister, your knees bruise from kneeling too long on hard wood. You are told to breathe through it, to feel the pain, but not hold it, like smoke through fingers. And strangely, you begin to understand. Pain, too, is a kind of ink. It leaves marks, teaches lessons, draws lines that memory cannot erase. Not all learning is martial. Some days you sit in the garden with your tutor, a monk with more wrinkles than you can count, and a laugh that startles birds. He teaches you poetry, not just how to read it, but how to notice it. The way a single line can change the taste of tea. The way silence between words can say more than the words themselves. He makes you listen to the wind, not just hear it, listen. Do you hear how it argues with the pine, but whispers to the moss? He asks once. You nod, even if you're not entirely sure what he means. That evening, you try writing a poem. It is clumsy. You rhyme when you shouldn't, but you hide it under your sleeping mat anyway, as if the act of trying has value all its own. music also finds its way into your days. Sometimes, at dusk, your elder sister plays the koto in the next room. You hear the notes drift through the paper walls, soft as breath, delicate as the moment before sleep. You're not allowed to interrupt, but you sit closer to the wall when she plays, as if proximity might help you understand the language of those strings. On some rare evenings, you're permitted to watch the older samurai of the house train with live blades. These sessions are quiet, almost unnaturally so. There is no shouting, no flourish, only movement, smooth, efficient, devastating. You watch their feet more than their hands, the way they shift weight, anticipate weight. There is a kind of grace in the violence, not beauty, not quite, but something like inevitability, carried with elegance. You begin to understand that the samurai path is not about aggression, it is about readiness and restraint. You are taught the rituals of tea, how to pour without spilling, how to offer with both hands, how to accept with a bow. It seems minor. But your instructor insists this too is part of being samurai. A warrior who cannot pour tea with care will spill blood without cause, he says. You remember this. Even years later, it will return to you. In the quiet before battle, in the stillness after victory, the household runs on rituals, some visible, some not. You bow before meals. You clean your own bowl. You thank the rice, the fish, the fire. These gestures, small as they seem, begin to shape your sense of place. You are not the center of anything. You are part of everything. Once you ask your father why samurai learn poetry, he doesn't answer directly. Instead, he opens a small wooden box and takes out a scroll. It is old, the ink faded, the paper brittle. He reads aloud. Even in armor, I hear the frog's soft leap into the pond. Spring is not at war. He folds the scroll and puts it away. Later, you will understand that poem, not its meaning, but its truth. One day, your cousin arrives. He is older, stronger, louder. His presence changes the rhythm of the household. He boasts. He challenges you to spar. You accept. You lose. But this time, you do not bite back your frustration. You let it show. Just a flicker. And your father sees it. That night he calls you to the veranda. You sit side by side, watching the moon rise like a blade across the sky. You were brave, he says, but not calm. You nod. Calmness, he adds, is not the absence of feeling. It's the mastery of it. You repeat the phrase silently as you fall asleep, letting it settle into the folds of your memory. Festivals are rare, but they happen. Once a year, lanterns are lit across the compound. Food is sweeter, laughter looser. You watch dancers move like flowing ink, and for a moment, the weight of your training lifts. You are still a child, and children, even those born into swords, need wonder. That night, your sister slips a folded crane into your hand. For protection, she whispers. You keep it tucked in your robe for weeks until it falls apart. But even then, you remember how it felt. Small, precise, fragile, like so much of what you're learning. Not all lessons come from instructors. One winter morning, you see a servant boy slip on ice and drop a bucket of water. No one helps him. He bows, apologizes to the air, and begins again. You remember his face, not because of the fall, but because of how he carried the failure, without complaint, without pause. You learn that dignity isn't about status. It's about how you move through hardship. Years blend, you grow taller, your strokes in calligraphy grow bolder, your bokken feels lighter, your posture straightens without effort. But most of all, your silence deepens, not as absence, but as readiness. You still play sometimes, in secret, a game with pebbles, a race with a sparrow, moments stolen from structure. They are precious not because they are rare, but because they remind you, beneath the training, the rituals, the code. You are still someone becoming, and that too is sacred. There's no ceremony to mark this shift. No one announces that you've stepped from the stage of imitation into the realm of ego. But it happens, quietly, like all dangerous things. It begins with comparison, not openly, of course. The samurai do not speak of superiority in loud words, but you notice things. How your stance seems firmer than the boy 2 years older. How your calligraphy earns a longer pause from the instructor. How your bokken strikes with a sound more satisfying, more real. You say nothing, but you feel everything. There's a duel, not formal, not sanctioned. A challenge among boys in the moment between training and chores. The sun is high, the gravel hot beneath your feet, and the bokken is steady in your hands. You win, easily, too easily. And when your opponent bows a little too quickly, you nod a little too slowly. It's a small moment, no one else sees. But something inside you shifts. That evening, your tea is colder. The wind is louder. You're not sure why. You don't sleep well. The next day, your father asks to see your sword form. He doesn't speak as you move. His eyes are unreadable. You perform perfectly. At least you believe so. At the end, he says only this. Again. You repeat it. Slower this time, trying to anticipate what he sees, or doesn't. At the end, he steps forward. Gently, but without warmth, he takes the bokken from your hand. It is sharp, he says, holding it lightly, but not clean. You don't understand. It cuts with pride, he adds, and that is a crooked edge. You bow, ashamed, not because you were wrong, but because you didn't even know how you were wrong. For the first time, you feel the sting of being out of alignment, not with form, but with spirit. Later that week, your calligraphy master gives you a new character to copy. Kenju, humility. You trace it slowly, over and over. The strokes resist you more than usual. The ink blots in corners. Your hand cramps. It's almost as if the word itself does not want to be owned by you yet. You begin to understand. This lesson cannot be forced. So you wait, but the world does not. There's an exam coming, your first public demonstration. Parents, elders, visiting retainers. You're told to prepare a sword kata, a short poem, and a tea ritual. It is not a competition, but it feels like one. You practice with fervor. Rehearse until your muscles ache and your breath shortens with every motion. And when the day comes, you step into the dojo like a storm waiting to be named. Your form is perfect. Your poem is delivered with clarity. Your tea, though, is poured too quickly. The bowl tilts. A drop, just one, lands outside the rim. It seems insignificant. But your instructor bows his head and says, "You rushed." Later, you overhear your name. "He is promising," says one retainer, "but too eager." The words sting more than correction. They cut in a place you didn't know was exposed. That night, you don't eat. You sit in the garden instead, watching a single lantern flicker in the breeze. It dances, wavers, but doesn't go out. You realize neither should you. The weeks that follow are quieter. You train as before, but your steps are slower. Not hesitant, deliberate. You begin to observe others again, not with comparison, but with curiosity. One boy, younger than you, moves awkwardly, but his face shows peace. Another, gifted with poetry, struggles in combat, yet never loses grace. You start to see that excellence is not uniform, that each path, though forged with similar tools, winds its own way through the forest. A servant offers you tea one evening. Her hands shake, the bowl rattles. You almost correct her, but stop. You take the tea with both hands. Bow. "Thank you," you say softly. That night, your dreams are not of battle or applause. They are of stillness, the sound of snow, the feeling of breath. But growth is not always smooth. You spar again with your cousin, the same who bested you years before. This time you are faster, sharper, and you win. He bows. So do you. But deep inside, a flicker of pride returns, smaller now, more subtle. A seed. And this time, it does not go unnoticed. Your grandfather visits again. He asks to see your stance. You show him. He nods once, then says, "You walk like a man who knows where he is going, but forgets who is watching." You lower your eyes. He places a folded fan in your hands. A warrior must be light enough to carry this as if it were armor. You don't understand. Not fully. But you keep the fan. Some nights when no one is watching, you open it, wave it gently, feel the air shift. The pride doesn't leave you. It never truly does. But it becomes quieter, like a tiger behind a screen, present but no longer pacing. Then comes the true lesson. A duel, formal, between you and a boy from another estate. Part of a gathering, a rite of passage. Dozens will watch. You are ready. Your strikes are clean. Your balance sure. The duel lasts only moments, and you lose. Not because you were weak, but because the boy read your rhythm better. His last move surprised you, a pivot you didn't see coming. You fall, hard. The wooden sword lands beside you. The audience is silent. You rise, bow, step back. Inside, your chest burns. But you say nothing. Later the boy approaches. He bows. "You are strong," he says. You bow in return. "You are stronger." He smiles. Today. There is no bitterness, and something inside you unclenches. That night, you write no poem. Instead, you sit by the koi pond. You listen to their quiet movements beneath the surface. Their world, so close and yet so separate. They do not know of duels or pride or lineage. They only know water, flow, survival. You realize there is something to learn from them too. When you return to training the next morning, your movements have changed. Not radically, but in subtle ways. Less force, more flow. Less declaration, more listening. Your master notices. He says nothing. But when you finish, he offers you a cup of tea, poured with care. It's a gesture that says, "Now you begin again." But this time, deeper. You bow. And this time, the bow is not for show. It comes from somewhere rooted. The pride is still there. It always will be. But now it has been tempered. Like steel in water, still sharp, but no longer brittle. Because now you know something pride never taught you. To fall is not failure. To lose is not shame. And to learn is its own kind of victory. Not because someone calls, and not because you want to, but because that's how your body moves now, guided not by impulse, but by rhythm. It has become natural as breath, as sunrise, as the quiet hush of the house before anyone stirs. Outside, the garden is still. The koi are barely visible beneath the mist on the water's surface. Bamboo stalks stand frozen in the chill. You watch them a moment, then begin your morning sequence, breathing, stretching, grounding your weight over the soles of your feet like roots finding soil. There is no applause, no audience, no reward. Only the act itself, and that, you've come to understand, is enough. The training does not change much now. There are no great revelations, no sweeping changes in form. The stances are familiar, the weapons predictable, the movements refined, yes, but known. And yet, you train as if everything depends on it, because it does. Discipline, you've learned, is not about punishment. It is about maintenance. About returning, again and again, to the same place, the same motion, the same breath, until it stops being effort and becomes presence. You train your sword stroke 100 times, 1,000, the same cut, the same line, and each time you find something new, a flaw in your elbow, a delay in your exhale, a tension in your jaw, you correct it. Then return. It's not perfection you chase. It's integration. There is a ritual to the sharpening of blades. You sit on your knees, the whetstone before you. Water trickles into a shallow bowl. The blade glides across the stone in careful rhythm, like a wave returning to shore. You don't rush. The process itself is meditation. You learn that a sharp blade is not the same as a ready blade. Readiness is quiet, poised, like the stillness before a storm, not tense, but full. Your teachers no longer explain much. They expect you to know, or at the very least to seek out your own answers. They demonstrate, then disappear, leaving you alone with form, repetition, and the strange company of your own thoughts. The sword is no longer exciting. It is sacred. It is no longer a symbol of identity. It is a tool of alignment. You find that you begin to notice more. The way your foot slides slightly on damp ground. The smell of wet pine that signals rain before it falls. The posture of your opponent before he draws. The heartbeat just beneath your own calm. This awareness, subtle, constant, is what the training truly teaches. And it never ends. On some days you tire, not of the work, but of the stillness it demands. You crave variance, surprise. But then, you see the older warriors, the ones with silver in their hair and silence in their gaze. And you understand. Their power comes from repetition. From years of moving through the same forms with the same respect until the body forgets what it is to hesitate. Your own hands begin to carry memory. Your steps fall into place before thought arrives. The blade is no longer lifted. It rises as if it belongs to the moment, not to you. You train with partners, sometimes faster, sometimes slower. You learn to read rhythm not as tempo but as intent. A man's breath reveals more than his stance. His shoulders whisper things he would never say aloud. A shift in weight, a thought before motion. That's where true duels are won. And you learn to wait. Waiting becomes its own skill. In battle, in life, in the dojo, you hold your strike not until it feels right, but until your partner has opened just enough. Not a moment sooner, not a moment late. It's harder than it sounds. Patience here is not passive. It is active stillness, poised restraint. The kind of waiting that listens more than watches. Outside the dojo, the lessons continue. You tend the garden, not because it's required, but because the act mirrors your training. You prune with care, remove weeds with slow precision, arrange rocks so that space breathes between them. It is not aesthetic, it is spiritual geometry. You walk the same path to the shrine each morning, and over time, you begin to notice the smallest details. A leaf moved, a crack in stone, the sound of insects stirring beneath the frost. Nothing escapes your gaze anymore, not because you try, but because you are present. The present is no longer a fleeting thing. It is where you live now. Your days are marked not by tasks, but by transitions, from breath to strike, from strike to stillness, from stillness to observation. You move not with urgency, but with continuity, like water through bamboo, unforced, unresisted. Occasionally, there is variation. You are asked to assist in training younger students, to correct their posture, their grip, their gaze. You are surprised by how much this reveals about your own habits. Teaching, you discover, is another mirror, and mirrors never lie. You do not enjoy authority, but you respect responsibility. And so, you guide gently, not with pride, but with patience. One boy cries after failing a form. You say nothing at first. Then, after he composes himself, you show him your own first bokken, still worn, still imperfect. This has struck more air than flesh, you say. He looks up, confused. And yet, you continue, it still teaches me. The boy bows. You nod, and the training resumes. You learn that encouragement is not always in words. Sometimes it's in showing your own scars, not the visible ones, but the quiet evidence of endurance. The slight limp in a master's step, the roughness in your calloused palm, the way your shoulder aches after storms. These things are not flaws, they are stories, and the body, in time, becomes a library of every repetition ever made. In the evenings, you sit with others by the brazier. You don't speak much, but sometimes someone tells a tale, a moment from training, or a mistake made, or a duel barely survived. There's laughter, yes, but there's also reverence. Because in these stories, you see reflections of your own path, the same falls, the same victories, the same doubts. You begin to realize you are not unique, not in your struggle, not in your growth, and that, strangely, is freeing. One night, your father joins you in the garden. He watches you perform your kata by lantern light. The shadows stretch across the gravel like echoes of movement. When you finish, he says, "You have learned form." You bow. "Now," he adds, "learn to forget it." You do not understand at first, but over the weeks that follow, you begin to feel it. The form becomes fluid. The strike no longer needs to be remembered. It simply emerges. You do not prepare. You arrive. And this is the quiet transcendence of endless training. It is no longer something you do. It is who you are. You rise and move before thought. You correct posture without analysis. You breathe not to calm, but because breath is the root of all rhythm. Even your dreams change. Less frantic, less dramatic. Sometimes they're just movements in the dark, slow, deliberate, endless. You wake not startled, but grounded, as if your mind, too, now trains in silence. Then, a visitor arrives. A ronin, once famed, now wandering. He stays for only 3 days. But his presence changes the air. He moves like no one you've seen. Effortless, empty, as if the blade obeys him not out of command, but recognition. He watches your practice once, says nothing. Then before he leaves, he bows to you. You are confused. Why bow to you? Because you are still training, he says, and then he is gone. You think about that for days. Still training. Not just training, but still. As in ongoing. As in not finished. You realize he meant it as a blessing. There is no end to this path, no summit, no final form, only the movement forward, breath by breath, step by step, cut by cut. And in that realization, something in you softens. You no longer chase the next skill, the next approval, the next edge. You simply return to breath, to balance, to the sound of your own feet in the gravel before dawn. Because in this life, that is the way. Not forward, not upward, but inward. To become the blade, to become the breath, to become the rhythm itself. You bow before the sliding door, even before it opens. It's early, the air still thick with dew, the scent of old wood lingering like memory. On the other side, he waits, always in the same place, seated on the tatami like he was carved from it, still, rooted and utterly immovable. Your master. He is not your father, but some days it feels as if he has shaped you more deeply than blood ever could. He never raises his voice, never smiles, never praises. But when he watches you, you feel it. Something shifts. The silence becomes denser, and that is enough. In time, you understand this relationship is not built on words. It's built on repetition, on patience, on glances that last just a breath longer than necessary. Your master is part of the clan, yet he lives like someone just beyond its edge. There are rumors. They say he once fought in battles long forgotten. Others whisper he lost something, or someone, and chose silence as his companion. But he never confirms. He never denies. He teaches as though watching you grow from within. He never rushes your errors, never softens your landings. He simply offers the path and waits, and you learn. You learn not to ask, not to seek approval in his eyes, to embrace the discomfort of doubt as part of the lesson. And that's where the clan enters. Because in the world of the samurai, you are never only yourself. You are a link in a chain, part of something older and heavier than your own name. At first, the clan is just a concept, a crest sewn on your robe, a name in a record book. But over time, it becomes presence. The look from the steward as you train. A nod from the armourer as you pass. The bow of the cook who knows your grandmother's name. The clan watches, the clan moulds, and the clan measures. Your master is the bridge between you and this greater body. He knows how the clan breathes, where it protects, where it wounds. And he teaches you, wordlessly, to walk that edge without falling. One day, he asks you to accompany him to the inner temple, a place only older samurai enter. You walk together, slowly. Along the path, he picks up a dry twig and hands it to you. You take it, confused. "Break it," he says. You do. It snaps easily. "Now take more." You gather 3, then 4. "Break them," he says. They resist. They hold. He doesn't explain, but you understand. Alone, you break. Together, you endure. The temple is silent. Wooden tablets bearing the names of ancestors line the walls. Simple, unadorned, yet heavy with time. Your master kneels, lights incense, and for a moment, his shoulders sag. It isn't weakness. It's reverence. You bow too. And something inside you shifts, not because he sees you, but because you feel seen by those who came before. Later, you hear the phrase for the first time that will follow you for years. You serve the clan, not yourself. It sounds simple, but it's a maze. What does it mean to serve the clan? Is it obedience? Silence? Fighting even when your heart resists? Dying without question? You hold that question close. It doesn't poison you, but it roots itself. Life in the clan is filled with ceremony. Some days, all members gather in the courtyard, robes flawless, aligned like reeds in wind. Your master always stands in shadow, watching. You, still young, feel sweat pool beneath your collar, but your gaze remains steady. At these gatherings, there are speeches, vows of loyalty, missions assigned, and sometimes punishments. You once see a man demoted publicly. He does not cry. He bows and walks away, leaving a trail of silence no one dares follow. Your master looks at you then, not with pity, not with relief, but with a look that says, "Pay attention. One day, this could be you." And you do. The clan offers identity, but it also demands erasure. As you grow, you realize your desires, your pain, your doubt, all must kneel before the clan's needs. And that hurts. But in a strange way, it also strengthens, like fire that doesn't burn, but refines. Your master trains you for moments like these. He tests your poise under pressure, your silence under insult, your calm in absurdity, not just your body, but your soul. A samurai is not measured by his sword, he tells you once, but by what he can swallow without bitterness. You remember this. One summer night, there's a clan council. This time you're invited to observe. Words fly, measured, polite, but sharp beneath the surface. One elder accuses another of negligence. Your father speaks in defense. Your master, again, is still. You don't grasp all of it, but you understand enough. Even within the polished exterior, the clan wrestles with itself, and you will have to learn to navigate it. After the meeting, your master walks with you in the garden. "Don't trust the mask," he says. You ask, "Which mask?" He smiles, for the first time in years. All of them. Time passes. You begin to represent the clan in small matters, delivering messages, joining training sessions with guests, sitting in the back of meetings. Every step is watched, every word weighed. Your master corrects you without correction. One day, he brings you to a neighboring village. A man from your clan has been accused of theft. The villagers demand justice. The clan demands silence. Your master mediates. You observe. On the way back, he asks, "What would you have done?" You pause. "Defended the man. He seems sincere." "Even if he's guilty?" "Yes, he's one of us." Your master shakes his head. "And if his actions stain the clan?" You say nothing. But the question follows you for weeks. As you mature, your bond with your master deepens into something beyond visibility. You speak little, but the silence between you is thick with understanding. One day, he gives you an old katana. No words, no ritual. "It was mine," he says. That's all. But in that moment, you know, this is more than a gift. It's a legacy and a burden. Because now, you carry not just a blade, you carry his story, and the clan's, and the long, patient shaping of your own. Slowly you understand. Your master never trained you to become him. He trained you to surpass him, to one day hold the clan's name with strength and with awareness. And that awareness is both the burden and the blessing of every true samurai. Not the rhythm of battle or of duty, but something more subtle. A cadence that pulses beneath the surface of everything you do. A beat carried in both the swing of a blade and the soft unfurling of ink on paper. You are learning that not all strength roars. Some of it whispers, and those whispers, you now know, come from art. Your mornings begin as usual, with silence and repetition. But after the training, after the sweat, the breathing, the burn of muscles familiar with the sword, you sit down in a small, sunlit room. A scroll is unrolled before you. A brush waits. Your hand, still rough from gripping the hilt of your bokken, holds the brush with surprising delicacy. The transition from warrior to calligrapher is not easy. It is humbling. And in this humility, you find another form of discipline. At first, you resist. Writing feels slow, useless, decorative. What good is a perfect stroke if your enemy does not pause to admire it? But your calligraphy master, older than the mountains it seems, says little and waits much. He watches as you rush the first kanji. He sighs. You begin again, and again, until something breaks. Not in the paper, not in the brush, but in you. You stop thinking about completion, about speed, about outcome, and for the first time, you just move. The brush slides, curves, pauses, not like a weapon, but like breath. And the character, Kokoro, heart, blooms on the page like a flower after frost. You stare at it, not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. It came from the same hand that swung a sword just hours earlier, and yet it feels gentler, truer, no less strong, but less hard. This, you realize, is the dual nature of your path. Steel in one hand, ink in the other, each tempering the other, each necessary. Your days are now divided not by time, but by balance. The sword teaches tension and readiness. The brush teaches surrender and flow. You begin to notice their overlap, how the pause before a downward stroke mirrors the breath before a strike, how the lift of the brush at the end of a line mimics the pullback of a cut that didn't need to land. You understand now, both are languages. The sword speaks to survival, the brush to meaning, and both are sacred. Your training changes, not in intensity, but in quality. After practicing kata, you now read poetry aloud to yourself under a tree, not to perform, but to absorb. You speak words written by others centuries ago. Words about rivers and snow and loneliness and plum blossoms that bloom too early and die too fast. And somehow these poems strike deeper than any blade. There's one you return to often. A crow takes flight, the pine no longer needed. Still, the wind remains. You don't explain it, not even to yourself. But when you whisper it before sleep, your dreams are quieter. The elders in the compound begin to notice. Not your technique, but your presence. You move differently now. Not slower, but more precise. Less rushed, less hungry. You begin to understand that mastery is not in domination. It is in harmony. You accompany your calligraphy teacher to a tea house one afternoon. He says you will paint the character for grace on a gift scroll. You feel unprepared. He smiles, the rare kind that makes you pause. You never prepare for grace, he says. You just become still enough to let it pass through. And so you write. The brush dips, rises, curves, and when you finish, he does not critique. He bows, and you feel complete, not accomplished, not proud, just right. Later, during sword practice, your master asks you to perform a familiar kata. You move with focus, not trying to impress, just breathing. When you finish, he doesn't speak. But he picks up a fallen leaf from the floor, hands it to you. Hold this as if it were a blade, he says. You do. He nods. Good. That night, you sit by the lantern and write. Not practice, not study, but because you want to. You write a letter to no one in particular. In it, you describe the sound of your sword as it cuts the air, the smell of ink on your fingers, the feeling of stillness when both are at rest beside you. You do not sign the letter. You fold it. Place it in your sleeve and forget it there for weeks. This is how the two paths merge, unnoticed, unforced, until you cannot tell where the warrior ends and the poet begins. You are sent on a small mission, deliver a message, watch a meeting, represent the clan. You ride through fields dotted with flowers. You sleep beneath stars. You listen to farmers speak of rain as if it were kin. You begin to see the world beyond the walls of the dojo and the quiet of your scrolls. And yet, you carry them with you. One night, by a river, you draw your blade, not to fight, not to threaten, but to see how the moonlight reflects off its edge. It gleams softly, not like fire, but like memory. And in that reflection, you see yourself, not as a boy trying to become, but as someone already walking the path, already in motion, already enough. Upon return, your master asks nothing of the mission. Instead, he gestures toward a scroll on the table. It reads, "Even the sword, if left too long in silence, forgets its edge." You nod, unroll a new sheet, dip your brush, and begin again. But now, with gratitude, you begin to help with ceremony preparation. Not because you're told, but because it feels right. You select the incense, arrange the flowers, polish the stands. And when the moment comes to bow before the altar of ancestors, you feel something in your chest expand. Not pride, but presence. The clan notices. They don't speak of it, but you feel it, in the way the cook offers you an extra serving of rice, in how the stable boy nods when you pass, in the silence your presence commands, not from fear, but from respect. You are not a master, not yet, but you are centered. You wake one night. No reason, just awake. The moonlight is heavy, thick like milk over the courtyard. You rise, barefoot, silent. In the garden, the wind moves the trees just enough to speak. You draw your blade, just once. And in one fluid motion, slice the air before you. Then you kneel, and in the same stillness, you write one word on the ground with your finger. You don't know which word, but it stays there, even after the breeze returns. And in that moment, alone, unspectacular, unseen, you understand. The sword is your edge, the ink is your soul, and you are the balance between. The kind of stillness that arrives after something large has passed, or just before something large begins. It hangs in the courtyard like mist, invisible yet present. You feel it in your steps, in the measured breaths of the elders, in the way the crows land on the roof tiles without hurry. You are trained, ready. Your blade is sharp, your body strong. You can hold a stance for hours, cut without blinking, speak with restraint. You have waited for the call, the one that says now, it's time, but it hasn't come, and so you wait. War, as you imagined it, is fast, fiery, filled with banners and thunder. But the truth, you are learning, is slower. It's in the whispers exchanged behind doors, in the messengers who ride without fanfare, in the quiet sharpening of weapons not yet needed, and in the minds of samurai who rise each day to train, knowing they may not draw their sword that year or the next. The days blur together. You wake, you kneel, you stretch, you train, you eat, you train again, you write, you sit, you sleep, then again, and again, and again. The sameness, at first, grates against your spirit. You begin to doubt, not your skill, but your purpose. What are you preparing for, if nothing arrives? But you keep training, because stopping would be unthinkable. You polish your armor until it reflects a distorted version of your face. You set your weapons in perfect alignment, adjusting the angles again and again. You memorize the sequence of armor buckles in silence, eyes closed. Not because anyone told you to, because it is how you endure the waiting. Evening becomes your favorite time, not because it marks the end of the day, but because it invites stillness with less guilt. You sit by the paper window, watching shadows lengthen. The tea is warmer then. The silence feels earned. Sometimes your master joins you. You speak very little. One night, after a long silence, he says, "What is the difference between readiness and restlessness?" You don't answer. He nods, as if your silence is the answer he hoped for. The days stretch on, and the waiting becomes its own discipline. You begin to notice the subtleties, how your breath sounds louder when you rise, how the weight of your sword changes slightly with humidity, how the koi in the garden pond swim differently just before rain. You become aware not just of threats but of rhythm, and you realize this too is part of the training, not just to fight, but to wait with presence, to stay ready without burning, to breathe without drifting. Other warriors, less patient, grow bitter. You hear them in the barracks, complaints muttered under breath, jokes sharper than they need to be, movements that are practiced, but without the softness of spirit. You understand, waiting exposes what war often hides, not bravery, but insecurity, not discipline, but ego. You write more often now, not poetry, always, sometimes just observations. The lantern flickers differently when I feel anxious. The sparrows return later this year. Perhaps the sword is not waiting. Perhaps it is resting. You don't share these words, but they guide you. One day, you are assigned to guard a gate. Nothing happens. For 12 hours, you stand, watch, shift your weight, say nothing. It is the most exhausting day you've known, and the most enlightening. You realize tension without release is a weight few can carry, but you carried it. And that means something. Your dreams change. You no longer dream of duels or heroic sacrifice. You dream of corridors, of wind through trees, of walking endlessly through mist, not lost, just in motion. Even in sleep, you are waiting. A storm arrives, not war, just rain, but it comes with thunder, with wind that bends the trees and rattles the shutters. You sit through it, no fear, only breath. You count the seconds between lightning and thunder. And you write, perhaps the world reminds us how to wait, loudly. Your master calls you early one morning. No explanation. He walks ahead. You follow. To the highest point of the compound. From there, you can see the valley. Mist rolls below. Hills rise like sleeping giants. Villages blink in and out of sight as the clouds move. Do you see it? He asks. You nod. The valley? No, he says. The pause. And you understand. It's not the land you're watching. It's the moment before something stirs. And in that moment, your training becomes real. Because now, you can feel the truth of your path. The sword is not just for war. It's for waiting. For holding space. For bearing weight no one else sees. That evening, you write a poem. You don't try to make it beautiful. You just try to make it true. No war today. Just rain. A blade resting quietly in its scabbard. And breath. You fold it into your armor, just behind the chest plate. You tell no one. But from that day on, your waiting feels different. Not passive, not empty, but purposeful. You train as before. But now, each movement carries depth. You no longer ask, when will I fight? You ask, how deeply can I be ready, without demand? And that, perhaps, is the most silent kind of power, because anyone can swing a sword in fire, but few can hold it in stillness, with grace and with peace. The room where your armor is kept is quiet. It isn't the silence of abandonment, but of reverence. Each piece rests in its own space. The cuirass on a wooden stand, the kabuto helmet displayed like a forgotten crown, the sewed shoulder guards lined in precise symmetry. They do not gleam like parade ornaments. They are not for show. They are tools, vessels, extensions of who you are, or who you might become. You kneel before them as if kneeling before memory. To dress in armor is not a task, it is a rite. It begins with the underclothing, linen, soft, worn from years of wear. It smells faintly of cedar and sweat. As you tie the cords around your waist, you feel the shift begin. Your body remembers. Breath slows. Spine lengthens. There's no need for haste. Each step grounds you. The leggings wrap around your calves, stiff but familiar. The plates of the cote slide over your arms like river stones falling into place. The cuirass rests on your torso with weight that is not heavy, but certain. You are no longer bare, no longer soft. And yet, this is not protection. This is alignment. As you secure the kabuto, you feel it settle like a second skull. Your eyes narrow slightly, not from tension, but from focus. The world looks different from behind the mask. Quieter, closer. You tie the chin strap, not too tight. Just enough to remind yourself that breath matters more than force. There is no mirror, but you see yourself clearly, and you are not dressing for battle. You are dressing for presence. This armor, worn not in war but in ritual, is less about defense and more about declaration. It tells the world, I am here, and I am prepared to bear the weight of this moment, even when that moment is peaceful, perhaps especially then. You stand. Slowly. The joints creak. Not with resistance, but with history. Every step now carries resonance, like footsteps across an old bridge. You feel yourself move differently, not because the armor limits you, but because it demands awareness. There's a reason this process is slow. It's not about safety, it's about sanctity. As you adjust the cords and plates, you think of those who came before you, warriors whose names are inked on the shrine tablets, men who wore this same style of armor, or something close to it, and walked into fire not with pride, but with stillness. They are not remembered for their noise, but for their composure. And as the final knot is tied, you realize, this armor is not just on your body. It is part of your soul's surface. The polish, the seams, the scratches from past training. Each one is a trace of your becoming. You walk, not toward battle, but towards stillness. The courtyard awaits. You step out slowly, the early light catching on the lacquered plates. No one speaks. A few nod. One child watches, wide-eyed, as if seeing a statue come to life. You bow. The armor shifts. It does not hinder you. It grounds you. Later that morning, you train while wearing it. The weight is real. The sweat comes faster. The movements take more effort, but somehow you feel lighter, not in body, but in mind. There is no room for excess thought inside this shell, no space for pride or doubt, only rhythm, only breath, only motion that begins before you decide to begin. Your master observes from the shade. He says nothing until you remove the kabuto at the end. Then quietly, "Do you feel it?" You nod. He doesn't explain, because he doesn't need to. That evening, you're tasked with cleaning each piece. It takes time. The lacquer must be wiped, the cords checked for wear, the inner lining aired out. You work slowly, in silence, and as your hands move over each surface, you begin to notice what you've missed. A new scratch across the breastplate, from a slip during a sparring match. A loose thread where the thigh guard connects. A faint imprint from your fingers, pressed too tightly during a moment of uncertainty. Each mark tells a story, not of battle, but of becoming. Armor, you realize, is not about the enemy. It's about what you carry when no enemy is in sight, and whether you can hold that weight without losing shape. You think of the phrase etched on the stand where your armor rests. Steel remembers what silence forgets. You don't know who wrote it, but you believe it now. The next morning, you're asked to present yourself in full gear for a visitor, a merchant lord from another province, curious, cautious, powerful in ways that don't require swords. You kneel before him in your armor. He circles you, speaks softly, says, "It must be strange to live inside such a shell." You look up, just slightly, and say, "It teaches us how to live without one." He blinks, then nods. Not because he understands, but because he knows he doesn't. Later, your master commends you, not for the words, but for not removing the armor until the conversation ended. "There are lessons," he says, "that only the body can teach." And in that moment, you feel something shift, not in your limbs, but in your spirit. The armor is no longer just a ritual. It is now part of your rhythm, something you step into, not for war, but for truth. That night you dream of water running over lacquered plates. No sound, only flow, only presence, only peace, heavy as iron and soft as ink. You don't talk about fear. No one does. Not your master, not the other samurai, not even the poets, and they speak of everything. Fear is not absent, no, but it wears different clothes here. It dresses itself in posture, in bowed heads, in careful pauses before speaking, in the silence between one breath and the next. You felt it, even before you had words for it, the first time you touched a real blade, unsheathed and trembling in your hands. The first time your master's voice dropped a note lower than usual. The first time a message arrived at the gate, and everyone went quiet. Fear does not scream here. It waits. It watches. It moves like smoke under doors, invisible, but unmistakable. And yet, you learn to live with it. Not to conquer it, not to destroy it, but to walk beside it, as if it were a brother with whom you share no words, only glances. You begin to recognize it in others too. A fellow student whose hands shake slightly when tying his armor. An elder who prays longer than usual before a ceremony. A messenger who delivers news without blinking, but forgets to eat afterward. No one mocks them, because everyone understands, even if no one admits it. Fear is part of the weight. and the silence is how it's carried. You remember one evening, years ago. A rumor spread. A neighboring province had mobilized its forces. The gates were checked, the armor polished, the swords aligned along the dojo floor like sleeping beasts. No order came. No war began. But for 3 days, no one laughed. Even the koi in the garden pond seemed to swim more slowly. And during that time, you noticed things. How people moved slightly closer to the walls when walking. How eyes lingered longer on the horizon. How even the wind seemed heavier, less playful. That's when you first understood the weight of anticipation. Fear doesn't always arrive as panic. Sometimes it is just waiting. And you held it. You trained as usual. You bowed as usual. But inside, your stomach tightened in knots you never spoke of. Only later did your master mention it. As you poured tea, he said, "Even the bamboo bends before the storm arrives." And nothing more. But that was enough. You've learned that silence too can be communication, especially in a world where honor is measured not by what you feel, but by how still you remain while feeling it. There's a kind of respect that forms in shared silence. On winter nights, when the wind howls and the lanterns flicker, you sit beside other warriors. No one speaks of what they fear, but everyone stares into the same fire, listening for footsteps that never come. And that is enough. The silence becomes a kind of companionship. You begin to understand that it's not the absence of words, it's the presence of trust. You trust that the others feel as you do, and they trust that you will not name it, because naming it might make it louder. And here, things are handled differently. You are not encouraged to confess. You are encouraged to breathe, to move, to honor the feeling by surviving it, not by unraveling in its arms. One day, a younger student falls during training. His fall is not serious, but he doesn't rise. His eyes are wide, his body frozen. You approach, help him up gently. Later, when alone, you ask him what happened. "I forgot what I was doing," he says. "I was thinking about, what if I fail? What if I disappoint him?" You place your hand on his shoulder. "You didn't fall from weakness," you say. "You fell from being human." He doesn't reply. But the next day, he trains harder than ever. And that's how it goes. You don't erase fear, you walk through it, slowly, with grace. Sometimes, when you're alone, dressing in armor, or preparing for a sparring match, it returns. That quiet voice that says, "What if? What if this is the moment I break? What if I'm not enough? What if they see my doubt?" And you answer it with a ritual. You breathe. You straighten your robe. You bow, not to the voice, but to yourself, because you've learned. The point is not to feel nothing. The point is to feel everything and still move forward. Your master tells you a story of a samurai long ago who stood guard alone during a siege. Everyone fled. He stayed. When asked why, he replied, "Because I was afraid they'd think I ran." Everyone laughs at the story, except your master. He looks at you and says, "Fear can make you brave. It stays with you." Later, you begin to keep a journal. Nothing elaborate. Just a line each night. Some are simple. "I held my ground today. My hand trembled during tea. I dreamed of falling, but I landed softly." Other times you write small poems. You never read them aloud, but they comfort you. They hold the pieces of your fear so you don't have to carry all of it. You've begun to understand fear differently now. It is not your enemy. It is the part of you that loves, that values life, that remembers what is at stake. Without fear, courage is hollow. Without fear, silence is just absence. But with fear, silence becomes strength, restraint becomes grace, and presence becomes power. On the day you're called to deliver your first solo message, a small mission but official, You feel it again. The tightening, the questions, the flicker. You rise early, dress slowly, kneel before your blade, breathe, and whisper, "Come with me," to the fear. And then you walk, steady, not fearless, but true. By nightfall, the message is delivered. No danger, no confrontation. But when you return, something has changed. Not outside, inside. You sit beneath the moonlight and write, "I did not fight today, but I carried the blade. I did not cry, but I felt the storm. I did not speak, but I said everything." And in that silence, you sleep. Not because the fear is gone, but because it finally knows it is welcome. There is a difference between killing and combat, and a greater difference still between combat and ritual. You were never taught to take life casually. That lesson came not in words, but in the weight of the blade itself. The first time you held it, the real one, not wooden, not dull, your hands tingled with something almost sacred, like holding lightning just before the strike. Violence in this world is not a wild thing. It is bound, caged, shaped, contained within form, within breath, within code. And yet, it is still violence. You feel it when you step into the dojo for your first live blade kata. The floor creaks beneath your feet. The paper doors are closed. The light filters in with a softness that makes everything feel older than it is. Your instructor kneels before you. He does not warn. He does not threaten. He simply says, "Move with respect." And you do. The sword moves through the air like thought, clean, precise, silent. But inside you, there is thunder. You feel the edge of it in your chest, in the pit of your stomach. A knowing, this can end a life. And also, this is beautiful. That's the contradiction you learn to hold. The blade is an artist, but the canvas it chooses is skin. You begin to understand that every movement is a conversation, not with your opponent, but with yourself. What are you willing to do? What line will you cross? What will you give up to keep your name intact? Because in battle, you may lose your life, but outside of it, you can still lose your soul. So you train harder, not to become more brutal, but to become more precise. Because true violence here is not loud. It is not desperate. It is elegant. You study the katachi, the forms that define the motion of the sword. Each one is centuries old, passed from hand to hand, not like secrets, but like prayers. The cut that arcs like a crescent moon. The thrust that mimics the crane's beak. The turn that follows the breath of a falling leaf. Each form, you're told, contains generations of memory. You do not add to them. You enter them, like a shrine. One evening, you witness a duel, not training, not performance, a real one. It's not loud. There is no crowd, no cheering, only two men, a disagreement over insult, perhaps, or duty. It doesn't matter. They bow, they draw, they move, and in 2 heartbeats, one falls. It is not glorious. It is not cinematic. It is clean. The blade enters and leaves like punctuation at the end of a sentence. The man who stands bows again, not to his opponent, to the silence. Later, your master says, "That is how it's done." You don't ask what he means, because you already know. It's not about winning. It's about doing it without excess. No anger, no cruelty, only necessity, ritualized violence. You learn to prepare for it with the same care you would prepare for tea. Your armor, laid out like a poem. Your blade, oiled with deliberate hands. Your mind, cleared, not of fear, but of noise. When you spar now, even with wooden swords, your breath sets the pace. Not the clash, not the rhythm of your opponent, just your breath. Inhale, Step. Exhale. Cut. Wait. Inhale again. And sometimes nothing more is needed. The moment passes. No one is injured. But something is resolved. Because not all violence lands on flesh. Some of it ends in the air. A warning. A promise. A question answered without speaking. You begin to view sparring differently. Not as sport. Not even as preparation. But as communication. You're not trying to defeat. You're trying to express. This is where I stand. This is what I've become. Can you see it? And if your partner sees, if they meet your blade with equal clarity, then something beautiful happens. A moment of mutual recognition. Two lines crossing without breaking, like cranes in flight. Afterwards you bow, and in that bow, there is more emotion than most conversations, because you've met someone at your sharpest, and both of you survived. That is intimacy in its rawest form. Still, not all violence is clean. You are taught the darker side too, the silent dispatch, the hidden strike, not because you are expected to use them, but because you must understand what it means to choose not to. You learn the pressure points, the angle of a neck that breaks without sound, the cut that leaves no scream. And each time, your master reminds you, knowledge is not permission. You carry that phrase like a blade beneath your robe. You've seen others forget it. A fellow trainee, gifted, ambitious, too eager to prove. One day, he strikes harder than needed. A bruise blooms where there should have been a touch. The instructors do not punish him. They exclude him. For a week, he trains alone. And when he returns, he bows twice as deeply. No one speaks of it again. Because violence here is not just an action. It is a mirror. It shows who you are when nothing holds you back. And that reflection must be intact. You remember your first real test. A bandit, caught stealing, escaped, armed. You were not alone, but you were closest. Your blade left its scabbard before thought. The fight was short. He lunged. You turned. He fell. Silence, breath, blood. Afterwards, your hands did not shake. Your legs did. Later, you sat alone in the shrine. You lit incense. You whispered a line you had read once, in a poem you never finished. We cut not to kill, but to remind the world that stillness has a cost. No one praised you. No one thanked you. But your master handed you your cleaned blade the next morning. He had done it himself. And that gesture, quiet, unseen, meant everything. Because ritualized violence does not seek reward. It seeks balance. You continue to train. But now, each strike carries memory. Not burden, just presence. You no longer imagine battles as you once did. Now, when you close your eyes, you see the silence that follows, the echo after the last footstep, the way dust rises in the absence of breath. And that is where you live, not in the clash, but in the calm that follows, because you understand. The point is not to swing the sword, it's to know exactly why you didn't tee. You can't find it carved in stone or read aloud in court. It does not shout, it does not explain itself, but it governs everything. Every breath you take within the walls of the compound, every bow you give, every silence you hold when someone speaks above you. It's not the code of war, not the law of the land. It is the code of conduct, invisible, ancient, enforced not by guards, but by glances. You learn early. It's not the sword that corrects. It's the stare across the courtyard, the silence after your mistake, the way no one says your name for an entire day. The clan doesn't need prisons. Its punishments are made of absence, of respect withdrawn, of presence erased. You watch it happen to others before it ever finds you. The young samurai who laughed too loudly during the incense ceremony. He was not scolded, just left out of the next ritual. No explanation. He stood in his full formal attire at the edge of the gathering, and no one looked at him. He bowed twice as long as necessary that day. And the next morning, his laugh was quieter, or the servant who arrived 2 minutes late with the tea. No raised voice, but for a week he was assigned to clean the stables, not because it was beneath him, but because it was far away, out of sight, out of grace. You understand then, in this world, punishment is not a strike, it is a removal, and in some ways, that hurts more. You live in awareness, not fear. Awareness. You notice where eyes fall, how long they stay, what words are not said. It is a language, and if you don't learn to speak it, you will be spoken over. Your master never outlines these rules for you. He simply lives by them. You watch the way he walks, never rushed, never aimless. You watch how he responds when interrupted, not with annoyance, but with stillness. You notice the way he bows to the cook, with the same depth he bows to the clan lord. And you understand, he is fluent in the unspoken. One afternoon, you make a mistake. Small, but not invisible. You speak before your elder finishes his sentence, not out of rudeness, but eagerness. There's a pause, a subtle shift in the air. No one looks at you directly for the rest of the meeting. You feel your face burn. That night, your master says nothing, but in the morning, your training is reassigned. No sword work, only cleaning the outer walls. In silence, alone, you work until your hands ache, not because of anger, but because you understand. That was the correction, and you accept it. Because here, dignity is not in avoiding mistakes. It's in receiving your consequence, without bitterness. The invisible code teaches you nuance. That timing is everything. That tone is a blade of its own. That a poorly timed compliment can be an insult. That silence at the right moment is the highest form of speech. You begin to sense the weight of pauses, the danger in casualness, the grace in restraint. And over time, your movements change. You bow before being noticed. You place your teacup down before the host speaks. You step aside before someone asks. You become quiet, but not invisible. Present, in tune. It is a difficult balance, because one misstep is rarely punished directly. It's allowed to echo, and the echo teaches more than the fall. There's a phrase whispered among the elders, better to bleed in the dojo than sweat in the hall. It means better to make your errors in private, because when they happen in public, the hall becomes very quiet and very cold. Once you witness a formal punishment, rare, severe, a samurai accused of cowardice in battle, not by running, but by hesitating. There is a tribunal, polite, measured. The elders speak in low tones. He kneels. He does not cry. He does not explain. He simply waits. And when the judgment is read, exile, he bows. But it is not the sentence that cuts deepest. It is the way the room avoids his eyes as he stands. The way no one reaches for his sword as he leaves. The way his footsteps sound louder than they should. That is the punishment, to be forgotten while still breathing. Later that night, your master says, exile begins before the gates. You understand. The code doesn't exile the body. It exiles the name, and once a name loses its place, no sword can restore it. You ask him once, quietly, have you ever broken the code? He doesn't look at you. He only answers, I've bent it. Once. And then nothing more. You don't press. Because in this world, even the truth wears armor. You grow sharper. Not just in blade, but in behavior. Your words shorten. Your gaze steadies. Your posture anticipates the moment before the moment begins. Others begin to ask your opinion, subtly. Not for answers, but to test your reading of the room. And you give it in half sentences, in nods, in pauses. Because too much clarity can be a weapon. And this code does not favor swords drawn too quickly. You witness others fall out of rhythm, A samurai who boasts after a successful mission. Not loudly, just enough to be noticed. 3 weeks later, he's sent to a distant outpost. No one says why, but everyone knows. Or the young girl who outshone her peers in training, but failed to bow to the elder watching from the shadows. She's reassigned, quietly. Her name dropped from the next roster. You learn, this is not cruelty. This is continuity. The code is not meant to harm. It is meant to hold shape, to prevent chaos from slipping through the seams of silk, to remind everyone, you are not the center. You are a thread, and the tapestry matters more than the hand that weaves it. Still, you struggle sometimes. Because perfection is impossible, and the code is invisible. It shifts, changes. What was correct one season feels presumptuous the next. You make small missteps. You bow too long. You speak too little. You wait too patiently and miss your moment. No one punishes you. But the silence returns. And you begin again. Each error is a soft echo. Each echo a lesson, until your presence becomes smooth, like lacquer over old wood, invisible to the eye, but unmistakable to the hand. And then, one day, you find yourself correcting another. Not with words, not with rebuke, but by stepping back when they step forward too soon, by offering them space to remember, by letting silence speak. And in that moment, you realize the code is no longer something you fear. It is something you carry, not a burden, but a boundary, a line you walk with balance and pride. This is the paradox of the samurai life. You live among others, train beside them, eat beside them, kneel with them in rituals that stretch back generations. You bow when they bow. You move when they move. You speak when silence permits it. The rhythm of your day is not your own. It is shared, rehearsed, inherited. But inside, the journey is solitary. No one can carry your sword for you. No one can hold your doubt. No one can kneel in your place when the moment comes. You begin to feel this more acutely as you grow. At first, you thought the loneliness would fade with time. That discipline would fill the empty corners of your spirit. That honor would crowd out the quiet ache of separateness. But it doesn't. Discipline is a structure. Honor is a weight, and solitude is the space between them. You feel it most during evening hours, when the compound settles into stillness. After the noise of training, after the rituals and the meals, after the lanterns are lit and the sandals are placed neatly outside each doorway, there is quiet, too quiet, sometimes. And that's when it arrives. The sense that no matter how well you follow the code, no matter how many bows you return or forms you master, there is a part of you that cannot be shared. You walk through the compound, past others, past sounds of low conversation, the clicking of teacups, the murmur of prayers. And you feel it, this invisible space between you and them, not distance, separation, like standing behind a curtain of water, close enough to hear, but too far to touch. Your master never speaks of loneliness, but you see it in him, in the way he stands alone under the eaves during rain, in the way he pauses before entering a room full of people, in the way his voice seems clearest when no one is listening. You understand that he too has walked this path, and that he still does. Not because he must, but because it is the only path left for those who choose to walk it fully. Your solitude deepens the more you commit. The sharper your blade becomes, the more careful others are around you. The more precise your movements, the less space you leave for conversation. You are respected, but not known. And this respect, while noble, builds walls around your spirit. You become a figure, admired, honored, consulted, but seldom confided in. No one asks you what haunts your sleep. No one asks you if you're tired. Because a samurai is not supposed to be tired. you begin to find solace in nature. The rocks don't expect you to speak. The wind does not ask your opinion. The trees accept your presence without needing performance. You spend more time in the garden now, not just for maintenance, but for refuge. You kneel beside the stones and rake them slowly, letting the pattern speak what you cannot. You trace spirals around a single pebble until the lines blur into nothingness, like the passing of thought. Sometimes you write a poem and burn it immediately, not because it is bad, but because the act of writing was enough. You've started dreaming of wide, open spaces, of hills with no paths, of forests with no walls, of walking and walking without the pressure of return. In your waking hours, though, the walls remain, so you walk them quietly. You nod when spoken to. You smile when you must. But inside, you carry this gentle ache, not sharp, not desperate, just persistent. A reminder that even in unity, there can be isolation. You try once to speak it aloud, to someone close, a fellow warrior, one you've trained with for years. You say, "Do you ever feel distant?" He looks at you, blinks, nods once, and says, "All the time." Then, "But I thought I was the only one." You don't speak more. You don't need to. That moment is enough. It plants something. Not connection, but recognition. And that, sometimes, is more valuable than comfort. You begin to realize that solitude is not the enemy. It is the shape of your path. Because the deeper you go, into discipline, into honor, into silence, the fewer will walk with you. Not because they don't care, but because they can't. And so you make peace with it. You begin to tend your solitude like a garden. You water it with presence. You trim its edges with humility. You let it bloom not into loneliness, but into space. Space where you can breathe, think, be. On nights when the wind howls too loudly and the candle flickers too low, you place your sword beside you, unsheathed, but at rest, not as a threat, as a reminder that this path, however quiet, still has purpose. That solitude is not emptiness, it is depth. And in that depth, you begin to find something unexpected. Stillness, not numbness, stillness. The kind that holds you gently, like the surface of a still pond. You sit beside it, not to escape others, but to meet yourself. Because here, in the quiet of your own company, you are not judged, not measured, not corrected, only seen. And that seeing changes everything. It does not erase the solitude, but it softens it. Until one day, you walk through the compound at dusk and do not feel alone. You feel accompanied by the trees, by the wind, by the ghosts of those who walked before you, by the breath of the world itself. And in that moment, you do not need to be surrounded to be held. You do not need to be heard to be whole. You only need to keep walking, even if the path is silent, even if the path is yours alone. Because this is the way, and you are not lost. You are simply becoming. It happens in the quiet, not during battle, not during ritual, not when the world is watching and you are all posture and control, but in between. In the spaces no one names, those fragile moments where time seems to forget its own rules, and something soft emerges from beneath all the iron and ceremony. Tenderness. You're not taught how to hold it. You're trained to resist it, but still, it finds you, in the most unexpected places. Like the first time someone hands you a cup of tea, and their fingers brush yours, not by accident, but with intention. Brief, subtle, but enough to remind you that you are not just armor and obedience. You are also skin, also warmth, also human. Or in the courtyard, when a breeze moves the trees and someone nearby murmurs a line of poetry aloud. Not to you, Not really. Just into the air, and it settles in your chest like breath. The wind does not ask permission to touch. You carry that line for days, not because it's profound, but because it made you feel. And feeling in this life is a quiet rebellion. You remember the first time you saw your master laugh. Not a smile, not a twitch of the mouth. A laugh, low, real, surprised by something so small you can't even recall it. But the sound, it stays with you. Because in that moment, he wasn't a figure. He was a person, breakable, reachable. And for a heartbeat, you weren't afraid of him. You were beside him. That shift, that sudden collapse of distance, is what tenderness does. It doesn't announce itself. It slips in, softly, briefly, and leaves something changed. You begin to look for it, not openly. That would be too much. But with your senses tuned, like someone listening for footsteps in the dark, you find it in small acts. A servant covering your bowl before the rain hits the window. A stable boy brushing the horse's mane longer than necessary, whispering something only the animal will hear. Your elder sister adjusting your collar before a formal gathering, her fingers quick, efficient, but her touch lingering just a second longer than required. These are not grand gestures. They are glances, breaths, moments stolen from a world that demands constancy and steel, and in them you begin to feel whole. Because you are not made only of control, you are also made of softness you're told to hide, and now you begin to protect it, not from others, but from yourself. There is a girl, not noble, not trained, just near. She brings linens to the washroom in the mornings, her sleeves always damp, her hair tied low. You never speak, but you bow when she passes. And once, she bows back with a smile so unguarded it startles you. That night, you cannot sleep. Not because you want something, but because something inside you remembers something it had long buried, how it feels to be seen, without rank, without ritual, without armor. And suddenly you realize, this is the danger the code warned about. Not lust, not desire, but connection. Because it makes you vulnerable in a way swords never could. But it also saves you. One evening, you're given a letter, anonymous, no seal. Inside, a single line. Even the plum blossoms open without command. You fold it and place it in your sleeve. Say nothing. But from then on, you pause when passing the plum tree in the south garden. You begin to write again, not practice, not forms. Real letters. Not to anyone, just to yourself. Letters that begin with, "You are tired today," or "Remember how the firelight looked on the floor." You do not read them aloud. You keep them in a wooden box, hidden beneath your cot. Each one a fragment, a piece of you the world does not see and does not need to, but still matters, because these are the pieces that make the rest bearable. You notice tenderness in your master too, in the way he wipes the edge of his blade with care, in the way he stands outside during the first snow, letting the flakes touch his robe, in the way he lights the incense not by duty, but by rhythm, a ritual so practiced it becomes affection. You realize then, tenderness is not absence of strength. It is strength expressed in gentleness, a kind of patience that grows where urgency cannot. You begin to carry it with you, a slower exhale, a softer step, a nod held just a second longer. You do not soften the blade, but you soften your grip, and that perhaps is the beginning of balance. Because power without kindness becomes brittle, and kindness without boundaries dissolves. But you are learning the space in between. You are learning how to be quiet, without disappearing. One night the girl passes again. It's late. She bows. And you, against everything you were taught, whisper, The plum blossoms open today. She looks at you, smiles, and walks on. That is all. But it is enough. You return to your quarters, sit in the dark, and for the first time in weeks, you cry. Not loudly, not in despair, just a quiet release. Because in this life of rituals and ranks and armor, there is still room for softness, even if no one speaks of it, especially then. You sleep well that night, because you are not ashamed, you are not broken, you are not weak, you are simply human. And that is something worth protecting too. Even with a sword, loyalty is not light. It is not the ribbon tied around a letter, nor the poetic line etched in a scroll. It is not declared during ceremonies or shouted in the heat of battle. True loyalty, the kind that defines your life and shapes your death, is a weight that settles slowly, like snowfall over the years, until one day you realize you carry something that no one else can see, and you can't put it down, not because you're afraid, but because to let it go would be to lose yourself. You serve a Lord. That's how it begins. Perhaps with an oath. Perhaps with a bow so long your knees ached. Perhaps with nothing but an understanding passed down like a scar. But over time, the word serve changes. It's no longer just a duty. It becomes your center of gravity. Every decision bends around it. Every action echoes from it. Even your silence answers to it. At first, it seems noble, romantic even, to serve, to belong, to place your sword at the feet of something greater than yourself. But then come the tests, the moments when obedience is not easy, when the orders conflict with the pulse of your conscience, when you wonder, is loyalty still loyalty when it costs you yourself? You learn not to ask aloud, because in the samurai world, questioning is not rebellion, it is weakness, and weakness endangers the balance, so you hold the questions quietly, like coals in your palm. They burn, but you do not drop them. There is a story you hear as a child, of the retainer who followed his lord into exile. He had a family, land, a future. But when the lord was disgraced, he packed nothing, said nothing, just walked, and lived for 20 years in silence, guarding a man who no longer had power. When asked why, he said, "Because his shame is also mine." You didn't understand it then. You do now. Because now, you feel it. That quiet, terrifying sense that your life is not yours, not fully. That at any moment, a word, a decision, a shift in politics can require you to change everything. Not by choice, but by vow. And there will be no complaint, only movement. Because loyalty, here, is not a feeling. It is a position, fixed, immovable, like a mountain that does not ask why the wind is cold. You begin to see it in yourself, the way your heart stills when your Lord enters the room, the way your hands move faster when the order is issued, not because you agree, but because it came from Him, the way you rise in the middle of the night to stand watch without being called, because that's what loyalty does. It makes you act without asking. And sometimes that frightens you, because you wonder, where do you end and the duty begin? But no one tells you. No one teaches where the line is. Because in this life, the line isn't meant to be found. It's meant to dissolve. One morning, your master shares a story, not in the dojo, not during training, but while walking through the forest in silence. He says, "My Lord once asked me to deliver a message I knew was a trap." You stop. He does not. I went anyway, because if he was wrong, he had to know I would still walk toward it. You do not ask what happened, but you remember the look in his eyes. It was not regret, it was gravity. That's what loyalty becomes, not love, not admiration, but gravity. You do not serve because you're inspired. You serve because you cannot not serve. And that makes you powerful and terribly vulnerable, because there are days when the order doesn't make sense. When you're told to cut ties with someone you trust, to leave a place you love, to risk your life for a cause you don't understand. And you do it. Not because you are unthinking, but because you made a promise so deep it no longer needs reminders. That is loyalty, a silence that obeys louder than words, and it ages you, not in your face, in your eyes. You begin to walk with a heaviness others mistake for wisdom, but it's not wisdom, it's weight. And only those who carry the same burden recognize it. You see it in other retainers, in the way they eat quietly when the Lord is troubled, in the way they clean their blade twice before battle, not for sharpness, but for readiness, in the way they look at one another when orders are given, that brief, knowing glance that says, "I feel it too." But none of you say anything, because that is not what loyalty allows. It is not a shared feeling, it is a shared silence. Then comes the moment you feared. Not a battle, not exile, a command. Simple, final. You are told to act against someone you know, someone who once trained beside you, who once saved your life during a sparring match, who once handed you a piece of dried plum during winter without a word. And now, you are to deliver a message that ends their time in the compound. There is no explanation, only the seal. You don't sleep that night. You sharpen your blade, not because you will use it, but because the act steadies your breath. You walk to their quarters. They see you and know. No anger, only stillness. They bow. You bow, and the moment passes. No blood. Just a name erased from the wall 2 days later, and a silence that lasts for weeks. You tell no one how much it hurt. You only train harder, because that is how loyalty survives, not by forgetting, but by continuing. Your master says, "Sometimes, what we carry is heavier than what we lift." You say nothing. But in your mind, you add, "And what we cannot put down shapes who we become." You begin to dream of water again. But now, you are not walking beside the stream. You are in it, flowing, unable to stop, but not lost, because even as you move, you feel the shape of the banks, the direction set by something older than yourself, and you surrender to it. Not because you're weak, but because you chose this current long ago, and you will follow it to its end. Not out of fear, but because you promised. And some promises are more real than life itself. It doesn't happen all at once. There is no thunderclap, no shattering of porcelain, no scream echoing through the corridors. Falling from grace in your world is a quieter thing. It happens in small moments. A silence that lingers too long, a door that doesn't open for you the way it once did, a name that is no longer spoken during the morning briefings. Like a candle flickering just before it gutters out, still beautiful, still warm, and then gone. You see it first in others. A retainer who once walked with pride now stands in shadow during rituals. His robes are just as clean, his posture just as formal, but something has shifted. People bow, but do not linger. His master's eyes no longer seek his. And one day, he is no longer there. No one speaks of it. Not because they don't care, but because to name it is to draw it closer. And everyone fears proximity to disgrace, as if it might stain by association. You learn quickly, failure is not always loud. Sometimes it is the absence of being needed, and sometimes that absence is earned. But other times, it's not. That's the hardest part. To watch someone do everything right, to serve, to obey, to breathe in rhythm with duty, and still fall. Because grace, in the samurai world, is fragile. It is made not of perfection, but of perception. And perception shifts with the wind. You begin to understand the warning behind every glance your master gave you when you were young. The stillness he held not as calm, but as caution. Because all it takes is one crack in the surface, and the water rushes in. For you, it comes slowly. At first, you feel a distance, a message not passed to you directly, a duty reassigned without explanation, a conversation that quiets as you enter the room. You brush it off, a misunderstanding perhaps. You bow deeper, you train harder, you listen more, but the silence grows. And one day, you are not called for the morning formation, not because you were forgotten, because you were excluded. That night, your master finds you sitting by the lantern. He does not ask, "What is wrong?" He only says, "Hold your spine even when they try to fold it." You don't cry, you don't protest, because you know, any defense sounds like defiance. And in this place, defiance is indistinguishable from guilt. You begin to move differently, slower, not from shame, but from care. Because now every gesture could be your last as part of this world. Every bow might be your farewell. And still, you stay. You don't run. You don't beg. You serve as you always did. Because if you are to fall, you will fall standing. One evening, a junior asks if you will teach him a new kata. You hesitate, then nod. And for a moment, the silence breaks. Someone still sees you. Not as broken, but as present. You cling to that moment, because in a life of quiet decline, kindness is louder than grief. Then comes the final sign, a summons, private, formal, brief. You are not told what you've done. You are only told that your role is no longer required, not condemned, not punished, just erased. The blade is not drawn, the robe is not torn, but inside, something parts, like fabric at the seam, and you walk back to your quarters not as a warrior, but as something undefined. You do not pack. You do not speak. You light incense, not for forgiveness, for clarity, because in this moment, what you need is not justice, it is stillness. You place your blade on the floor before you, not to surrender, but to acknowledge this life was never truly yours. It was a gift, and gifts are meant to be returned when the time comes. The next morning, you wake before the sun. Dress as you always did. Tie every cord with precision, not because someone will see, but because you will know. You walk to the gate. No one stops you, but someone bows. A servant, barely older than a child. You bow back, and that is the goodbye. There is no farewell feast, no song, no record, just the sound of your steps on the stone. And behind you, silence. But ahead? Ahead there is air and possibility, not freedom, but the chance to carry yourself fully for the first time. Because grace, once lost, is not always gone. Sometimes it becomes humility. Sometimes it becomes wisdom. And sometimes it becomes the soil from which something quieter grows, a gentler strength, a deeper breath. And so you walk, without banner, without role, but not without honor. Because honor does not come from the approval of others. It comes from how you choose to move through the silence, especially when no one is watching. Death is not distant. It does not hide behind the hills or wait until old age smooths your face. In your world, it stands beside you, not as a threat, but as a companion. You are never without it. It breathes with you. It watches you train. It sits silently when you take tea. It waits, without impatience, without cruelty. And in time, you come to know, death is not an enemy. It is punctuation. The final line in a sentence you have spent your whole life composing. You do not fear it, but you do not rush toward it either. Instead, you prepare for it, not with desperation, but with precision. As with everything else in the life of a samurai, there is a form, not just for how to fight, but how to die. You are taught this early, not in blood, but in silence. The first time you see someone take their own life, not from despair, but from duty. You are too young to fully understand, but something inside you understands anyway. The way the room was prepared, the way the blade was cleaned, the way the second stood, composed, ready to end the pain with a single merciful strike. No one cried, no one turned away, because this was not chaos. It was a final act of loyalty, perhaps of repentance, carried out with grace. You bowed that day more deeply than ever before, not because you were told to, but because something sacred had passed through that space. Later, your master said only, "That is how you close a life." Not with screaming, but with stillness. The idea settles in your bones, and over the years, you begin to shape your life not just toward duty, but toward completion. You imagine your death not with fear, but with craft. What words would you leave? What gesture would remain? What silence would follow? You sharpen your sword not just to protect, but to ensure that when the time comes, you can die cleanly. Because to die well is not a tragedy. It is a final gift to your clan, to your name, to yourself. You write a poem, not because you plan to use it soon, but because no samurai should wait too long to know how they would say goodbye. It reads, "The blade rests quiet now. My breath folds into the wind. No regrets remain." You do not share it, but you keep it close, folded into your armor, not as a prophecy, as preparation. You begin to understand others differently too. When you speak to the elderly, you listen more closely, not for wisdom, but for shape, for how their lives hold together or don't. Some speak freely, light as wind. Others carry silence like debt, and you vow to carry yours like grace. There comes a time when a comrade falls, not in battle, in illness. You sit with him through his final days. He does not ask for medicine, he asks for company. And in his last hour, he smiles. Not because he is happy, but because he is ready. You watch as he breathes out slowly, and then no more. You do not look away. Because in this world, you honor the dying by staying present, not by mourning before they are gone. You build his pyre yourself, place the offerings, light the flame, and as the smoke rises, you whisper, "You finished what you began." It is the highest praise you know. Later, when you are alone, you begin to compose another poem, not for now, but for one day. If my name fades, let the stones remember how gently I stepped into the final dark. You realize something else. Dying well is not just about the moment. It is about the life that leads to it. And so you live with that in mind, not fearfully, not solemnly, but intentionally. You speak less, but when you do, your words land with care. You train not to defeat, but to refine. You bow longer to the servants than to the lords, because both will one day lie beneath the same earth. You look at your blade, now not with pride, but with acceptance. It may take your life, or it may carry you into someone else's death, and both are sacred. One evening, you visit the memorial stones. You light a lantern for those whose names are carved deep, and one for those whose names are worn away, because forgetting is the only true end. Your master finds you there. He kneels beside you, says nothing, but places a folded cloth in your hand. Inside, a letter, his own final words, already written, already sealed. He does not ask you to read it, only to keep it. And in doing so, he names you, not with rank, but with trust. You place it gently in your robe and bow, because now you are part of his ending. And when the day comes, you will carry him to the fire, with steady hands and dry eyes, because love does not weep at the closing of a life well lived. It bows and says thank you. As you walk home under the weight of stars, you realize you are not afraid of dying. You are only afraid of not finishing your sentence, of leaving the last line unwritten. So you return to your training. You sit longer in silence. You refine your kata until it no longer belongs to effort, but to rhythm. And you speak your name aloud once each morning, not to claim it, but to honor the voice that carries it. When death comes, and it will, you will not flinch. You will kneel. You will breathe. You will place your blade where it must go. And you will say, with every motion of your body, "This is how I lived. This is how I end." Nothing is wasted, because for you, dying is not the end. It is simply the moment the ink dries, and the scroll is rolled, and the silence becomes complete. The compound holds stories, hundreds, perhaps thousands, but most of them are unspoken. They rest in empty rooms, in old tatami mats, in the pattern of cracks along the courtyard stones. You walk these halls and carry those echoes with you, though you never tell them. Because some things must remain unsaid. Your grandfather's name is one of those stories. You never heard him speak about the war he fought or the friend he lost, but you've seen his gaze across the kimono chest, lingering at a dented rifle and a folded flag. You've heard his footsteps slow near the old scrolls. That silence suggests more than any words. He bows to you one day, more deeply than required, and no explanation follows. But the ritual is enough. He hands you a wooden box. Inside, a faded photograph of a man in armor. Your grandfather's father, perhaps. Your chest tightens. You say nothing. You carry the photo in your robe until the frame on the mantel is moved and the photo placed quietly back in the chest. You learn to carry stories this way, without noise, with reverence. The morning lately feels weightier. You wake earlier before any call and walk through the empty dojo. You kneel by the old scuffed floorboards and place your hands on their surface. Something there rests in the grain of the wood, a buried moment, a forgotten breath. In the training ring, you feel it too. The movements once practiced by others, the footsteps that made no sound, the strikes that landed where they must. You participate in the present, but you also feel the past. Often, a visitor arrives, a wandering monk or a ronin seeking work. They carry a story in their gait, in the tilt of their head. You bow. You listen. They don't speak. They leave. And as they leave, you feel the echo of their absence. A question perhaps unanswered, or a broken vow folded into the lines of their face. Sometimes you are the keeper of such silence. One evening, after dusk, a wounded messenger arrives. You recognize his gait, not broken but slowed. His clothing bears your clan's crest. He reaches the gate, collapses. You kneel beside him. He does not speak. He hands you a small note. You read it, a name, a date, a warning. Then he sifts out of awareness. You stand and honor a silence you cannot break, because to speak of that note would be to tear open the wound it protects. And you, trained in restraint, leave it unmentioned. The messenger is carried inside, and later, a door closes softly behind them. The courtyard returns to its quiet. Inside, you sit across from your master. He pours you tea in silence. You don't ask what you should do. You don't volunteer what you've heard. The stillness holds both message and question. And there, you hold your answer. You carry a similar weight when you think of the girl, the one who brings linen. You never learn her name. But you know enough. Her quiet presence, her silent attention, the way she bows and walks on. You feel her story in shared glances. Something unspoken, not romantic, just human. A breath between two worlds. You could break the silence. Ask her name. Speak a single sentence. But you don't. Because to ask would shift something sacred. And silence is also protection. It holds fragile things together. The dojo itself has a story, not written in scrolls, not recorded, but lived into the wood. That time a young warrior defeated his master and walked away, silent. That time the rains softened the boards until a blade sank unexpectedly. That time the old master bent to pick up a blade that had fallen in anger and never raised his voice. You don't ask. You just assume the lessons, learned pain and mercy, are embedded in the grain. You train with renewed awareness of these echoes. Your sword makes a different sound now, like water over pebbles rather than thunder over stone. Your feet land with softer resolve. Your breath is quieter, but deeper. One afternoon, you sit with the sword unfolded across your lap. A student nearby practices cuts. You close your eyes. You hear the rattle of wind through bamboo. You hear laughter, soft, far off, echoing through empty rooms. You feel stories not your own brushing your heart. You stand. You set the sword aside. You walk through the compound alone. You pass the dining hall, the tea room, the sleeping quarters. Every space is full of histories you did not live, but that shaped the present. At the edge of the hill, overlooking the valley, you pause and speak quietly. Your story stays. Perhaps the wind carries your words downward, perhaps not. Either way, they reach the walls. Shame is not part of these stories. Regret is silent. Loss is held, but not spoken. Because to speak too loudly would undo the shape you carry, the shape of someone born into legacy, expected to respect it, but never sworn to reveal its secrets. Still, sometimes you dream of telling, a scene in which your grandfather stands before you and says, "Tell them, someone must." And you wake to find your hands empty. No note, no photograph, just your blade, silent and steady. Perhaps someday, perhaps not. For now, you keep the silence. You honor their stories by living in their echoes. Knowledge comes in whispers, not proclamations. And so you move through each day as if framed by memory, not revisiting the past, but carrying its weight. You bow at morning prayer in the ancestral temple, not because it comforts you, but because it unites you with those who stood before. At ceremony, you stand closer to the portrait of the old masters, as if your presence could acknowledge their shadows. No voice needed, no words said aloud. When a student loses their way, you guide with silence. Be still, you murmur. Listen. And they do, because they feel, beneath your breath, the centuries that brought you there. One night, you write in your journal. Some stories refuse to be spoken. They live in the stillness, the echo, the pause between one life and the next. You fold the page. You do not read it aloud. You are the echo's keeper. And that role matters. The sword will one day rest. Your blade will cool. But these echoes, these unspoken stories, they continue, carried by breath, by posture, by attention. You are not the author, but you are the vessel. And that may be the greatest honor of all. There is a moment every samurai imagines, though few speak of it. The moment the blade is no longer needed. Not because peace has come forever. That is a child's dream. Not because you've lost it in battle. That is another story. But because something inside you lets go. You wake one morning and do not reach for the sword. You dress slowly, deliberately, and your hand passes over the scabbard without pausing. The gesture feels strange, like forgetting a word you've known all your life. The world outside is unchanged. The training grounds still echo with shouts. The bamboo still leans in the wind. The incense still rises in delicate lines above the ancestral shrine. But you are not the same. It doesn't begin with pain or injury. It begins with stillness. A quiet so deep, it no longer asks for a response. And into that stillness, something else arrives. Understanding. You are no longer the blade. You are no longer the strike. You are the one who remembers. At first, you resist. You train harder. You push your limbs beyond exhaustion. You revisit every form, every kata, every lesson carved into your bones. You try to become what you once were, but you feel it, the difference. You are not slower. You are detached. The blade no longer sings in your hand. It hums, distant, respectful. It no longer calls you forward. It waits. And one night, while sitting before it in silence, you finally say the words, "It's time." Not because of failure, because of fulfillment, because the path you walked has reached its natural curve, and to continue would be to imitate rather than embody. You expect sorrow. Instead, you feel relief. Not lightness, there is too much memory for that, but a kind of alignment. Like stone settling into earth. You spend the next morning in ritual. You clean the blade one final time, each motion deliberate, reverent. You oil the scabbard. You whisper a verse. You were never mine, only with me for a while, and I thank you. You bow. You do not cry. You are not losing a weapon. You are returning a part of yourself to the silence. From there, the world adjusts. You no longer walk to the training yard. You walk to the garden. You trim the branches that lean too far. You sweep paths before anyone wakes. You arrange stones near the pond where the koi glide without urgency. Your hands remain steady, but not for striking. Now, they hold presence. Some watch with confusion, others with curiosity, a few with fear, as if stepping away from the blade is a form of death. But you know better. You are not vanishing. You are evolving. You meet with younger warriors, not to instruct, not to correct, but to listen. They ask questions. You answer with stories. Not strategies, but moments. You tell them about the time your master watched the snow fall for an hour and said nothing, and how that taught you more about patience than 1,000 drills. You speak of a battle won not by force, but by restraint. You share the poem you wrote the day you were nearly exiled, and how silence saved your honor. They don't always understand, but they remember, and that's enough. You walk differently now, less with direction, more with awareness. You see the shifts in others, the small hesitations, the quiet courage. You see the moment a younger warrior falters in a bow and the shame in his eyes. You step forward and adjust his sleeve, quietly. No rebuke, only correction born of care. That is your sword now. Attention, precision of presence. One day, you are asked to witness a duel. You do not watch for form or skill. You watch for the breath between movements. You see one falter, a flicker of doubt. And later, when the match ends, you kneel beside him and ask only, "What did you learn?" He says, "That I was afraid." You smile and say, "Good, that means you're awake." Fear is not failure, only forgetfulness is. And you now more than ever, remember. You write again, long letters to no one, folded poems tucked into drawers, a journal of dreams, not because you expect them to matter, but because they matter to you, and you deserve to speak, even if only to yourself. The sword rests on a simple shelf. It is no longer your extension. It is your memory. It does not call to you. But when you pass, you nod. A silent acknowledgement of a chapter completed. Sometimes, late at night, you dream of drawing it. Not to fight, but to hold. To remember. To feel its weight one more time. Not as burden, but as blessing. And you wake with a peace you never knew when you carried it daily. Because now you carry yourself. The you beneath the sword. The one forged not in fire, but in silence. And for the first time, you are not becoming. You are simply being. And that is enough. Not in the ticking sense, measured by clock or candle flame, but in the slow erosion of boundaries, of roles, places, names. You watch the years settle over the compound like dust over scrolls. You feel the history deepen in the tatami, silvering the eaves, softening the sandalwood beams, etching quiet lines across your own face. Some days, you forget how long you've served, or who you served. There is no single moment of transition, only layers peeling away, memories becoming soft around the edges, until you're not sure where your story ends and the story of this place begins. That's the passing of time. It begins quietly. One morning, a student bows to you, not in greeting, but in confusion. They expect the title you once carried. You realize it has slipped away. The words fall on your tongue like stones. You do not correct them. Silence feels more honest. The seasons cycle as they always have. Cherry bloom, summer heat, autumn red, winter stillness. You watch them from the veranda, each year deeper, slower, richer. And with each cycle, you feel the distance grow between you and the roles you once held so tightly. Names fade too. Your name, once spoken with respect, then expectation, is now rare. It echoes in the sparse halls, but only as gentle echo, not as announcement. You sometimes forget your own name. Only the morning mirror reminds you, and even then, it's a whisper. You don't mourn it. You don't resent it. You just live with it. Because forgetting is part of the path. The lessons you learned were never meant to remain sharp. They were meant to blunt into wisdom. You recall the morning your father died. You were away. News came. You returned to find the courtyard silent, formal. The funeral scrolls in place. But the living had moved on. The flowers wilted. The staff whispered that life must continue. You realize then that mourning is also moving. Not forgetting, but reshaping. You practice this now with your memories. You let them soften. You carry the stories in your posture, not in words. In the way you pause before plunging that first rake through gravel. In the way you serve tea. In the depth of your bow. No one needs to ask why, because time has taught you. The house you lived in as a youth is now occupied by others. The incense jar cracked. The scrolls faded. The courtyard pond, quiet. Koi replaced. You return one day and see a leaf floating on still water. You nod. It says more than permission. Your body changes. Limbs once strong and practiced feel unfamiliar. You don't push them. You adjust. You slow. You train less. Walk more. Because part of forgetting is acceptance. A friend from decades ago visits. Their eyes linger on you differently. There's recognition, but also distance. You feel grateful for friendship that remains despite the erasure. They speak not of old matches or missions, only of the now, of health, of tea, of weather, and you realize how little these things used to matter. Now they matter most. The cherry blossom returns. You sit beneath it alone. A student passes, stops, bows. You nod, they smile, walk on. You notice the ground, littered with petals. They remind you that beauty is ephemeral, and acceptance is quiet. No ceremony marks this, no speech. Just petals and presence. You wake to find a poem written on your door. No name. The branch that forgets the snow still knows spring. Someone remembers. You step outside and nod to the sky. They glance at you, uncertain. You offer a small bow, not for your name, but for theirs. Time passes, and forgetting continues. A training hall is dismantled. An old dojo stands empty for the first time in a century. You watch the workers remove wood. The tatami carries dust. The floorboards crease. Memories of your footfalls shift under your steps. You do not protest. You bow. Time asked. You released. And you remain. They ask you once to lead a ceremony. You do. But in the morning light, your words are clipped. No authority. Only invitation. They flow like petals in water. You finish and sit beneath the lantern. No applause. Just calm. That's enough. Without fanfare. Without title. Without expectation. Even your sword, once ceremonially retired, is moved again. It rests in the archive room. Nobody visits, but you visit it. Once, touch the hilt, nod, leave. Your body doesn't ache. It acknowledges. Sometimes children laugh in the courtyard. You smile, then pause. Memories drift through you, of your younger self, training, shouting, alive with purpose. You feel both pride and simplicity. No regret, just complexity. Time deepens everything. You write nothing. You don't need to. The lines are in your bones. Rather than names fading, you now stand in a peaceful blur, neither teacher nor student, neither here nor gone. You bow to the dusk. They bow back, naturally, without thought. That moment you realize forgetting is not erasure. It is home. When your body fails, slowly, surely, you feel the blessing. Your joints don't resist. Your breath carries less weight. You walk with the clarity of someone who has already begun departure. When the time comes, quiet, as everything has, the students lead you outside. They gather beneath the cherry bloom, petals drifting. You sit in silence, wrapped in warmth smaller than ceremony. A poem is read, not yours, but it speaks to you. To forget is to release the river to flow. You smile. Your eyes close, not in fear, but in trust, because time, truth, and forgetting have prepared you. Your breath heart slows, your pulse quiets, the petals fall, and in that hush, a legacy remains. Not in scrolls, not in deeds, but in the way your absence echoes, not lost, just folded into the land. And when the last petal settles on still water, then the story becomes wind, and all who listen feel it pass. There is a quiet that follows death, not silence. Silence can be broken. This quiet persists. It lingers in the beams of the hall, in the spaces where sandals no longer stand, in the bowls that remain untouched on the shelf. It is not heavy. It is not loud. It is not mournful. It is complete. You were prepared for this. Not in the sense of knowing how it would feel, but in the way a stone knows the shape of the river it has lain in for years. The erosion of time, the slow softening of edges, the recognition of stillness as a kind of wisdom. Now you are the quiet. No one speaks your name in the days that follow, not out of fear, but because the name has already become part of the walls, the floors, the echo of steps in the dojo. There is no grave. There is no shrine. There is a small garden. In it, a flat stone, no inscription. Just a single plum tree that blooms quietly each spring. That was your request. No fanfare, only presence. The students tend it now, not because they are told, but because they understand. That tree does not grow in memory. It grows in continuity, in the passing of hands that learned your rhythm, in the boughs they hold just a moment longer, in the way they step onto the mat with awareness, not urgency. You are not gone. You have been transferred into breath, into practice, into the way someone places their blade down with care. One day, a young student stops at the tree. He's not old enough to remember your voice, but he bows, then asks, "Who was this for?" A teacher responds, not with your name, but with a story. A story of a man who once walked in silence, who listened more than he spoke, who trained not to win, but to understand, who died not with drama, but with acceptance. The student doesn't respond. He simply touches the bark of the plum tree, and something passes between them. Not fact, not data, but a seed. And that seed will grow, not as remembrance, but as inheritance. In the temple, an old scroll is found, not signed, not complete. A list of phrases. Breathe before speaking. Do not move the blade unless you are ready for stillness. Let the silence teach you. They hang the scroll, not because it is beautiful, but because it speaks, even now. Especially now. Time continues. The seasons roll. The clan changes. Walls are repaired. People come and go, but certain gestures remain. A bough held longer before the shrine, a stone placed quietly by the plum tree, a pause before the name is spoken aloud. And these gestures carry more than any monument. They carry the weight of a life lived in alignment, not perfection, but presence. You become a myth in time. Some say you never raised your voice. Others claim your blade was never drawn in anger. Some say you died seated beneath the falling blossoms. Others, that you vanished into the mountains. None of it matters, because truth, in the end, is not about detail. It's about impact. And your impact is felt in the way the hall remains still during storms, in the way the students sweep the garden with care, even when no one watches, in the way someone stops mid-sentence and decides to listen instead. You are not remembered for your rank, nor your victories, nor your words. You are remembered for your conduct, for how you were, and that is enough. One winter, a traveller visits. He kneels by the tree, says nothing, leaves a small piece of rice paper beneath the roots. It reads, "He left no mark, and yet I follow." The wind carries it. The petals return in spring. The world continues, but the quiet remains, not as a void, as a presence. It does not ask for recognition. It does not demand a shrine. It simply is. You are that quiet now. Not gone, only dispersed. In every breath of incense, in every silent sparring match, in every bowed head. And so, the story ends. Not with thunder, not with flame, but with a breath, exhaled fully, and finally,